Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to EcoBusiness Lunch and Learn, a monthly session hosted over lunch where we get to hear from sustainability subject matter experts. I'm Ping Manondo, Partnerships Manager, Southeast Asia, and Country Head for the Philippines at EcoBusiness, Asia Pacific's largest and leading ESG media and intelligence organization, and I'm pleased to be moderating today's session. Global disruptions, local impacts. These are more pronounced, felt in Asia, a region which accounts for more than half of the global energy demand, is a renewable energy hotspot with 48% global share, and today is the world's biggest emitter. According to the World Economic Forum's latest Energy Transition Index, emerging and developing Asia demonstrated the fastest rate of improvement in energy transition compared to other regions at 6% since a decade ago. However, energy demand per capita has grown up to 18% in the last decade and is projected to double by 2050. Asia needs to keep on a climate friendly path in meeting this future demand. The question is how? I am very pleased to introduce our expert today who will help us answer this question. Vince Yeo, Director Gas Power and Climate Solutions, S&P Global Commodity Insights, on South Korea's renewable energy story. Monica Merdikawati, Research Analyst, ASEAN Center for Energy, who will talk to us about what's propelling Vietnam's wind energy success. Stephen Peters, Senior Energy Specialist, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the Asian Development Bank, who will differentiate between waste to energy and energy from waste, and whether there is indeed a burning opportunity in Southeast Asia to harness energy from our refuse. And last but not least, Ryan Velasco, Head of Corporate Strategy and Mergers and Acquisitions, Energy Development Corporation, on the Philippines' baseload geothermal energy potential. Our speakers will each be given 10 minutes to address us in the order they were introduced. After their messages, we'll have a 15-minute interactive Q&A, so please do put your questions in the chat box. Without further ado, Mr. Vince Yeo will now address us. Vince, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vince Hall. I'm a research director at S&P Global Commodity Insights. I hope you have a very good lunch now. So I'd like to give you a little bit on the South Korea's renewable energy story with focus on some lessons learned to the other markets. So just to give you a background about South Korea's energy market, I think everyone here understands about the world's energy crisis. At the moment, we hear about natural gas price hitting a record almost every week or so. And if you think about South Korea's energy supply, about 80% of its energy supply is coming from imported fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, oil, and the volume is also very large. South Korea in particular is the world's third largest LNG importer, so which makes it in a really difficult position because the world is facing a rise in fuel prices. Based on our analysis, LNG import price in South Korea has nearly tripled over the last year. This year, in the first half, the price was about $20 per MMBTU. This was about 3 times higher than the last year's price. So the South Korea's energy economy is hit hard by the world's the global energy crunch at the moment. So with this situation, the question will be, what's the implication of this rising cost of fossil fuels on the energy market? And our company's analysts have made a LCOE, levelized cost of electricity forecast across the Asian market. And based on our analysis, Out of 15 markets that we analyze, 13 markets, solar or wind will become cost competitive against coal or natural gas by 2025. And one of the main reasons for this outcome is actually because the both coal and natural gas price will remain high throughout this period. So the global energy crunch, which is facing the world today, will not go away in a month or so. This will be a multi-year crisis. So we think that this will actually affect and elevate the fuel cost of coal and gas. So by 2025, in South Korea, for instance, the LCOE of solar will be around $85 per megawatt hour, whereas coal, in terms of coal power plants, the cost will be around $88 per megawatt hour. And this is mainly because of a high fuel cost. When we calculate the LCOE, for instance, coal in terms of coal power plants, 60% of generation cost, fuel cost, 60% of LCOE is from fuel cost, whereas for solar or wind, there is no fuel cost. So this is the current high fuel price environment is actually making renewable energy more cost competitive than the other fossil fuels. Now let's switch gears a little bit to the policy side. Um, if you ask what's the biggest driver in terms of shaping South Korea's renewable energy market today, the answer will be a renewable portfolio standard. So we can argue whether it has been successful or not, but it has become the dominant source of making the market that the South Korea is facing today. The way the RPS works, it's based on the comply or pay obligation on power generation companies. So for instance, if the power generation companies have, let's say, 100 gigawatt hour of electricity generation from coal or gas, and the annual RPS target is 5%, then they are mandated to provide at least 5 gigawatt of electricity from renewable energy sources. So as the government raise the RPS targets, the company will need to raise their share of renewable power generation. So this is how the RPS works. And in general, the big power generation companies, state-owned power generation companies, do not have a high share of renewable energy portfolio. So they usually make a long-term PPA agreement with renewable power generation companies by jointly developing SPV for solar or wind projects. And there are two benefits in terms of having this sort of top-down RPS policy in South Korea. And this would be maybe relevant to the other markets where the electric power market is regulated. So number one, this top-down approach will be quite useful to drive the government's electricity target, because the government could simply raise the RPS target to basically achieve the renewable energy share target. And secondly, the long-term fixed price contractual arrangement will actually help facilitate project financing. And this is quite critical because in the other markets where the market is liberalized, there are high risk in terms of price fluctuation. And with the fixed price contracts guaranteed for at least 20 years, then the project developer can actually lower their financing cost. So these are the main drivers, and one of the reasons why the South Korea has seen some rapid growth in terms of solar and wind. if we think about the technology, which technology will win in South Korea's renewable energy market, solar will definitely become the largest source of electricity capacity by 2050. Based on our forecast, we think that the solar annual solar capacity addition will be around 2.8 gigawatts, and it will reach 105 gigawatt by 2050. And this is not very challenging given that the country has been already installing about 4 gigawatt per year of solar power plants. But I would like to focus on offshore wind in particular. Offshore wind will become a rising star in South Korea. And there are some reasons for this. The country does not have a lot of land. Land is quite scarce and it is expensive. And the level of local community acceptance for solar or onshore wind is quite low. Wind resource is also far better out in the sea than in for than onshore wind. So the capacity factor in offshore wind is 30%, 40%, which is quite higher than 24% for onshore wind. So there is some economic case for offshore wind, and we see already about 18 gigawatt of project pipeline being developed in South Korea for offshore wind, and we see a big momentum on this technology. Last slide. In South Korea, another thing to remember, the government plans to spend billions of dollars to make a hydrogen economy. So green hydrogen production will also become a new business model for renewable energy. So take a quick example for this Ulsan floating offshore wind. The plan is to generate electricity from 6 gigawatt wind projects. 80% of electricity generation will be used by industrial and the residential sector, but 20% of electricity generation will be used to generate green hydrogen. So the green hydrogen will be used by petrochemical or oil refinery sectors, and by also some fuel cell electric vehicles. This is quite attractive in terms of the size of the project, but also given that the South Korean government is willing to provide subsidies in terms of hydrogen production cost. And we see some other projects being developed in a similar manner. So for instance, some other projects are actually aiming to use offshore wind to generate green hydrogen and export to the other markets. So we think that offshore wind will have a big momentum in South Korea. But again, the cost will become a big challenge still. So the government support will be quite critical to make green green hydrogen, and especially the related role of offshore wind in the future. So I think that's all I have for now. Thanks for listening. I'll hand over to Ping.
Thank you so much, Vince. Very exciting sharing there on the role of RPS and of course regulatory framework that will create the enabling environment for RE to progress. And that solar is really the leading tech in Korea, but also offshore wind is a rising star, and that government-backed subsidies for green hydrogen could be the next most promising technology as well. Thank you so much, Vince. We'll come back to you on our questions later, but now I'll hand the floor to Monica Merdikawati on the Vietnam's wind energy success. Monica, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ping, for the kind opportunity. May I check if my screen is visible?
Yes, we can see your screen and can hear you loudly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, thank you, Ping, for the kind opportunity. Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Merdekawati. I'm the research analyst of ASEAN Center for Energy. Hopefully, for the next 10 minutes, I could share the success story of Vietnam wind development, who can be an inspiration for other Asian countries with similar, who face similar energy challenges. So next slide. First, I would like to begin by introducing ACE, my organization, ASEAN Center for Energy. So ACE is an intergovernmental organization under the purview of ASEAN Secretariat that represents the interests of 10 ASEAN member states in the energy sector. We have three main roles: to be a think tank, energy data and knowledge hub, and also a catalyst of energy cooperation in ASEAN. The catalyst role is our core mandate, which is to strengthen the integration between the member countries through the implementation of the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, or APAC in short. APAC is a series of guiding policy documents that support the regional energy cooperation in achieving the goals of ASEAN Economic Community. So let's begin with the Vietnam's latest Power Development Plan, or PDP-8. PDP-8 is the policy reference for the wind energy success in Vietnam. The PDP-8 covers the capacity expansion planning for 2021 until 2030 with the vision towards 2045. Once approved by the Prime Minister of Vietnam, it will supersede the predecessor, the PDP-7. The formulation of PDP-8 has started in 2020. It has been under multiple revisions as indicated in the timeline here. The latest is the fourth draft issued last month and has been approved by the Prime Minister. In comparison to the PDP-7, the PDP-8 aims 10 until 20 gigawatt higher capacity and significantly lower coal. Throughout these four revisions, PDP-8 prioritizes the infrastructure improvement to strengthen the grid flexibility. And from the figure here, I want to highlight the significant change before and after the COP26 when the government of Vietnam announced their net zero pledge. In the last two revisions of the PDP-8, the share of gas is higher than coal, and the discussion has been focused on the high load scenario, or also known as the net zero 2050 scenario. And the mix of renewable energy technology also changed significantly, which I will explain in the next slide. Here, a closer look into the renewable energy planning. At least 20 gigawatt capacity additions are planned for the next few years until 2030, where wind will be the center of Vietnam's decarbonization. From only 582 megawatt onshore wind in 2020, PDP-8 aims to add add 16.1 gigawatt onshore and 7 gigawatt offshore, or in total is 23.1 gigawatt wind. From the figure here, we can also see the significant capacity increase of offshore wind, especially since the third and fourth draft, from only 2 gigawatt in second draft to 7 gigawatt. While in the comparison, the expansion of the hydropower is relatively similar in each draft, which implies 4 until 8 gigawatt capacity additions from 2020. And the interesting point here, the solar power development is delayed until after 2030, meaning we may expect no new solar projects until 2030, and the discussion is still ongoing whether to decide the status of the committed solar projects under the PDP-7. And to attract a wind market, the government launched the FIT scheme in 2018, which is 2 years prior to the discussion of the PDP-8. The rate for the onshore is 8.5 cents and 9.8 cents for the offshore. The validity of the FIT is the same for solar, which is 20 years. However, if we compare with the first solar FIT at 9.35 cents when it was introduced in 2017, the wind FIT is lower, especially considering the higher upfront investment. Despite so, the scheme has attracted 146 wind projects, of which only 84 meet the deadline, or equal to a total capacity of 3.98 gigawatt. Many stakeholders, such as private developers, associations, and experts, have voiced the need to extend the FIT to save the failed projects, or equivalent to the 4.1 gigawatt here. However, the government is adamant with the decision to stop FIT scheme by October 2021 last year. Instead, the ministry planned to introduce the PPP model with the focus on auction to foster the competitive price. So to conclude, this is my last slide. The lessons learned, here are the 5 lessons learned from the Vietnam. First is the government clear commitment, which demonstrated by the 3 key points here. The second is the Vietnam a good strategy to leverage its indigenous characteristic of renewable energy resources. The third is how Vietnam deployed the FIT schemes to attract or create the wind market. The fourth is the auction scheme to really continue the sustainability of the market itself. And the fifth is the close coordination between stakeholders in implementing the planning. So I think that's all. Thank you for your time, and sorry for the disturbance. And back to you, Ping.
No, thank you so much, Monica, for lending your time to us, and you know, for the little one there that you probably could attend to in the moment. So thank you so much. And we took away from that discussion the fact that Vietnam's wind energy success is based on it being a very indigenous resource of renewable energy, and shifting to another potentially source of renewable energy, particularly in Southeast Asia. I'd like now to call Mr. Steve Peters from the Asian Development Bank to talk to us about waste to energy. Steve.
Hi, Ping. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Doing good. I can hear you okay. Thank you very much.
I'm good. I was wondering, do you have a picture you could put up for me?
Yes, absolutely. Ben, we do have the picture for Steve that we could share with the rest of our participants today.
Okay, so while you're waiting, the background here is the dump site on Majuro in the Marshall Islands, and it shows the level of urgency that we have in the waste crisis regionally. And it's not just the Philippines, it's pretty much everywhere in the developing world. So if we could get that photo up, then we can start talking. I can start talking to it, Ping.
Yes, it's going to be up in a moment.
Super.
But this picture, this background of yours, Steve, really articulates the massive problem that we have. But also the argument for waste to energy is that it is a massive problem, but it could potentially be a massive opportunity where there is processes that are correctly followed. At the same time, that it could solve at a local level a lot of our waste problem and provide some opportunities as well for local government units to make some money. So it's really, as I see it, waste to energy is a contentious issue, if you might agree. We have some people contesting about the sustainability of waste to energy, but at the same time, as this photo, which I will not steal the thunder from you to explain, would show, it might be able to address a lot of social problems. So Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Ping. So first of all, just to be very clear, I'm not an evangelist for waste to energy. I'm an evangelist for looking after people and helping people get out of poverty. That's my job, right? So if you have a look at this, this is a great example of what goes on pretty much all over developing Asia. And you can see them burning some plastic bags. They're probably doing that to burn off some outside of some cables so they can get the copper. And as you can see, it's not a particularly healthy looking environment. Now, the problem with doing what they're doing is that the coatings around those cables will most probably be fire resistant and will be treated with chemicals that when burnt will probably give people in the near vicinity a very high chance of getting cancer. So they're not the ideal materials to be burning openly. To put this in perspective, 82 to 90% of dump sites, and I call them dump sites, they're not landfills, they're dump sites, throughout developing parts of Asia. And that's not just in the big cities, it's also in the rural towns and rural communities as well. It's just dumped on the ground. So we have, first of all, we're creating methane from rotting food waste, which is normally more than half of the waste that comes out of, is generated in Asia. Additionally, you have these issues with open burning. Now, open burning on a dump site is between 5 and 8 times more dangerous and produces 5 to 8 times more persistent organic pollutants in the process than perhaps you might do in incinerating something. Now, when you incinerate something, you burn it without any controls. You might have a bag filter, but you won't have any gas scrubbing. Now, when you have a plant that has gas scrubbing and complies to international standards, that's called energy from waste. So I wanted to differentiate the terms waste to energy, incineration, and energy from waste. So let's put it very, very clearly. What is contentious is energy from waste. Incineration should not be done as described therein. Energy from waste has a place, but what is its place? So when you look at this, you can tell that this system is pretty much in chaos. There is, no controls. It's a health and safety issue. You've got stagnant water lying around. You've also got probably pretty high methane content. And so we know from history, recent history all over Asia, we have landslides in these areas, we have fires, we have explosions. There was a massive fire outside of New Delhi earlier this year. So we have an ongoing problem. So the way that I would like to explain this is waste to energy for the sake of waste to energy is not a great idea. It's a solution that might work in highly dense, highly developed areas of Asia. But if you're looking at areas where there is more land available and you can do zero waste communities and you can do a large level of recycling, you could do it. You should do it. So the use of this technology is context specific. It's very context specific. It's, do you have land? Do you have density? How much waste do you have? What type of waste is it? Is there a recycling market? So you see behind me this photograph. It looks like a lot of plastic. It's about 12 to 15% plastic, but there's no recycling market. The only way they can recycle it is to pull the plastics out and put them on containers and send them back to a location where there might be some recycling. So it's a supply chain issue and it's a governance issue because we're not paying for materials to be recycled. We're just bringing them in, and then it becomes the government and the community's problem when this waste is not dealt with. So what we want to do is I want to just present a methodology of how we're thinking about where waste to energy and generally waste management should be. And I'll share my screen if I can. Ping, can you see that now? Oh, what's going on?
Not yet coming up.
Sorry, my computer is, okay, terrific. Can you see it?
It should be here in a few. Ben, I think we should take down the current photo so Steve could shift to sharing his slides. Thank you, Ben.
Okay.
There it is.
There it is. Terrific. So when we talk about waste to energy, we would much prefer to talk about it in terms of waste, energy, and then also the environmental impacts and ultimately the ocean impacts. I was at a presentation yesterday with Holcim where they launched the Circular Explorer, which is their waste cleanup, ocean waste cleanup tool, and they're all interrelated. There's an interrelationship between the production, the use, the disposal, and then in the environment and the environmental problems. They're all related, so you can't look at them independently. So we've put together 12 pathways, and when we mean pathways, we mean not everything goes on one pathway. There will be multiple amounts of materials going in pathways. So when you look at advanced waste to energy, which is energy from waste, that's for end of life. And we're only looking at this, our view is only to look at this in terms of where it's context specific. And we have a tool that we've developed called WARPS, which we use to model this across a range of activities, which include health, persistent organic pollutant emissions, a whole range of things. But the challenge with these plants is not so much the discharge from the stacks, because the toxic materials have been removed that are produced in this process. And to put it in perspective, the amount of material that's produced, toxic material that's produced in these plants versus an open burning is about 12 to 15% the quantity. That's roughly it. So if you look at the problem, the challenge next is to look at what do you do with that material after it's been caught in the air pollution control systems. So it's called fly ash. Dealing with that is the challenge. Emissions are not as bad as the underlying baseline case, but the fly ash emissions and fly ash management is an issue that needs to be dealt with. So that's one we're working on. What we also find is that we have the concept called eco park. So instead of just building one large piece of infrastructure, you look at building perhaps a facility that might handle, say, 40 or 50% of a city's mixed, unrecoverable, unrecyclable waste and turn that into energy. But then you also co-locate that with activities doing recycling, doing biogas, and a range of activities. Singapore is actually doing that type of activity at the moment. China has done it. Japan has done it. That's the direction it's going in. So when you look at these waste to energy plants, they should not be looked at as a standalone silver bullet that solves all the problems. It should only be looked at as something that can deal with a backlog out of the chaos, which is what we saw in that photograph. But there's other activities that we should be looking at doing as well. We should be promoting the innovative upcyclers. So those are people who are recycling, who are turning materials into other materials, looking at the ways that you can, and they don't have to be big, they can be small, they can be neighborhood activities. And then you can also look at neighborhood waste treatment, which is some of the barangays in the Philippines have their own trommel screens. So they trommel their waste, use it to make compost, or they can use it to make things like black soldier fly larvae, which is another thing to feed chickens and fish. But we see a really very easy intervention is the use of digitization. And there's a number of apps that have been developed like Octopus, ReCity, Recycle, which are looking at taking the collection and sorting of recyclables and upcyclables and those materials that can be used to generate alternative proteins and biogas and compost. And that gives a marketplace for that. So that takes it out of the control of the city. So the cities deal with what's left over. And then you can then also use those apps to run cleanup campaigns, and people can buy materials from those cleanup campaigns. So that's another way of going forward. Green ports are an extremely important transformation because effectively they can be massive eco parks. They can be regionally based eco parks, so eco-industrial parks. So we see that ports in Rotterdam and Amsterdam are a great example of that. The next thing is looking at extended producer responsibility. So we see a lot of companies doing this. Coca-Cola's done a lot of it, where they say, okay, we'll recycle every bottle. For every bottle we release, we'll recycle one in return. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to recycle the rest of them out. So there are space for corporate EPR schemes, but there should also be space for national EPR schemes. When I grew up, if you had a glass bottle, you would always get 5 cents back, which was a lot of money when you were a little kid, to take that glass bottle back and it would be reused. We don't look at those sorts of activities. And, you know, one of the challenges is we have, especially in the Philippines, we have this sachet economy because of economic and governance issues. It's now a massive problem that you have all of these small sachet materials, which are multi-layer plastics going into the ocean. And they're in the waterways, they're in the land, they're in the dump sites. It's a great problem. So then if you put a price on those, you would make it then possible to fund the cleanup of those activities and collection of those activities. But that's not been done yet. That's something that can be done. The other thing is to recycle, strengthen the existing recyclers. So we've done a few loans supporting recycling companies, notably Indorama in Indonesia and Thailand, where we look to support them to actually scale up and do recycling at scale so that it actually creates the scale at which it then can be said we can then sell secondhand recycled resin, we can sell recycled product. There isn't a market for that at the moment. There needs to be a market made. And then of course, the other way is looking right back at the other end of the supply chain and saying, what can we do to change consumer product redesigns? And the great example is sachets. There's a company that came and spoke to us in the Philippines recently that had a shampoo bottle that was in the shape of a small shampoo bottle, about 1.5 inches long. And it was basically three washes of your hair. And it was, basically it had no plastic on it. It was simply a little bar, effectively a bar of soap. And then the next thing is looking at how can we strengthen and build up governance, not only at national, but also at LGU levels and at societal levels. How can we get people aligned? How can we get the conversation happening so that we are all going in one direction? It's not our intention to build, just so we're very, very clear, it's not our intention to build very large pieces of infrastructure simply for the sake of building them. They have to be part of a strategy to overcome a challenge and then set us on a path where we can do all of these different pathways. So it can't be done on a standalone basis. So this is an example of a study we did on a rollout for an app called ReCity in India.
Hi, Steve.
Like, how long
Sorry
have
to
I got?
interrupt, Steve. No, it's not the time, but maybe we could refer to the slide that you'd like to highlight for this study.
It should be on the screen.
I think that we should be moving to the slide that has this.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I think
There
I've
you
lost.
go.
Yeah. Okay. Have you got that slide now?
Yes, this slide, I'm seeing the ReCity slide.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're having some problems with our IT system here at the moment for the last day and a half. So that may be the issue. You saw the previous slides?
Unfortunately, not. But now we're seeing this ReCity slide on Study of Waste app.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. There were three separate slides. Okay, so this is an example of a digitization platform. It's done in the local language Odia, which is in Odisha state in India, and this looks at a way of being able to track and trade materials, and it gives insight, and it can tell governments, and that people can identify where materials are. So then, as a consequence, we can plan infrastructure around it. This is a very interesting project. Can you see this new slide on EPR?
No, we cannot.
Oh, yeah, it's something going on with. Let me try that again. I'm sorry, Ping. We're having.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries.
Can you see that now?
Yes. So it does come up. We just have to give it a few minutes, or a few seconds rather.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, it's the IT system here. Okay, you can see that now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if you look at, obviously you see the circular reference on the left-hand side, which, talks about, consumers throwing waste out, going to recyclers, going to industry, and how can we create that circular economy. There will be some stuff at end of life, but the objective for going towards a circular economy is to make as little as possible be end of life. Now, that's sort of counterintuitive to building large pieces of infrastructure to deal with end of life issues. So when you plan these facilities, they have 20 to 30-year lifespans. So we have landfills all around the place that will at some stage need to be cleaned up. And there's still a backlog in many of the cities that we have in Asia. So I think there is a space for waste to energy projects, but I think it needs to be planned in line with not cutting out the possibility to do recycling or upcycling or any of the activities which are higher up the waste hierarchy, waste management hierarchy. And that indeed is a part of our energy policy, which we released last year. But this slide gives a pretty good explanation of where the opportunities are to go towards a circular economy. I would love to have a circular economy today, but it's going to take us time to get consumers to buy products and get companies to design products and produce them from materials that we've recycled and recovered. We need to do more, I agree. There needs to be a lot more money deployed on it. But I think it's very important that the conversation is focused on what is the solution, and saying that we want a circular economy now, it's just not feasible to change every process and redesign every process in every supply chain. We have to move towards it, and we have to move towards it rapidly, yes, but I think that that is the point I wanted to make, that we need to plan the transition away from what we're doing, the chaos of the moment, towards a system which is probably a bit more useful. So on that note, Ping, I'll finish and I'll hand over back to you.
Thanks very much, Steve. There's really lots to digest from there. And thank you for defining your role as an evangelist for ending poverty. Thank you very much over at ADB. Now we have our last speaker. Last but not least, nonetheless, we have Mr. Ryan Velasco, who is from the Energy Development Corporation, speaking to us about the potential for geothermal power in the Philippines to hopefully challenge baseload energy sources from fossil fuels, particularly coal. Vince, I now give the floor to you. Hi, Vince. If you're speaking, I think you're muted.
Oh, hi, Ping. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, sorry. Let me pull that back again. Okay. Okay, just to confirm, Ping, you can hear me now. No? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone, to all the attendees and also to my fellow panelists. I know that you all need to go back to work soon, so I'll try to do this quickly. No? So, basically, this thing that you see on the left, this is from the cover of our annual report last 2017. We took it out of the archive because, similar to today's theme, we also believe that more needs to be done. If things don't change, we are currently on course for a planet that's 3 to 4 degrees warmer now, by the end of this century, which is far from the 1.5 degrees target that's being floated around. This is also especially relevant for us here in the Philippines, as our country is amongst the 10 most vulnerable countries when it comes to the potential impacts of climate change. And also, another thing is almost half of the greenhouse gas emissions in the Philippines, mostly almost half, come from energy production. We see a shift to more RE, to more renewable energy as essential. And we also see more customers moving to find clean sources of energy. So in the next few minutes, we'll try to cover and highlight geothermal in terms of some of the potential opportunities, some of the key benefits, and how we can further develop this sector. But before that, who are we? No? So EDC, we are the largest vertically integrated geothermal company globally. We have close to 1,200 megawatts of installed capacity, operating assets, all of it currently in the Philippines. We also have offices in Indonesia, Chile, and Peru, where we have some early stage development projects right now. So aside from geothermal, we also own the 150 megawatt Burgos wind farm in Ilocos. It's the largest wind farm in the country. And we also have some solar and hydro projects in the country. So basically, what is geothermal? No? And we can talk about this for hours, but I'll give you the abridged version. So basically, geothermal is you harness the heat from the earth. No? You use the steam that you produce so that you can run the turbines, and which in turn generates electricity. So you need three key elements. Number one is heat. 90% of the heat is actually stored in the rocks. Number two element is fluids. It's what will help transport that heat to go up. You can use it as steam to power your turbines. And then number three is permeability, which is basically, it means that fluids should easily move freely through the rocks and flow. You need all three for a successful geothermal development. And you'll see on the bottom right, this is where you'll see most of the geothermal projects globally, or at least where you can find good geothermal resource. So it's along the Pacific Ring of Fire. So in terms of the opportunities for this afternoon, we'll focus on the where, in terms of where you can find geothermal opportunities, not just in the country, but also in the region. But there are also some various partnership opportunities that we can explore. We work with various partners, more on an open innovation setup. So we work with them and explore how we can improve our operational performance, assess new and innovative technologies, potential co-investment, and other collaborations across the value chain. If that's the interest, then just send me a quick email or just link me up and we can talk separately. So in terms of the where, so if you look at the chart on the upper right, you'll see the top 10 countries globally in terms of geothermal production. Two of those countries are in Southeast Asia, and both have room for further growth. So let's look at the Philippines. Close to 1,900 megawatts currently. Various technical studies show that there is potential to double that capacity. And the government is also very supportive of renewable energy development in the country. Based on the recent development plan, the government is targeting to increase the share of renewable energy from 21% right now to 35% by 2030 and to 50% by 2040. Let's go to Indonesia. So it's currently number 2 behind the US. And various publications show, or you can see now various experts say that this 2,300 megawatt installed capacity is just 10% of its actual potential. The government has also announced plans. They plan to target around 3,300 megawatts of additional geothermal capacity within this decade. Not on this list, but is another Southeast Asian country, Taiwan. They're also quite active in terms of promoting geothermal development right now. They have instituted a feed-in tariff to encourage local and foreign investors to come in. Basically, you get a 20-year power purchase agreement, and you get it for 18 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on the size of your project. So given all of that potential, what are the key challenges now that are in a way hampering sometimes the development of geothermal? Or to put it conversely, what can we do to pave the way to accelerate its development? So one is regulatory support for tariff and permitting is quite essential. Most of the PPAs, or the power purchase agreements that we see right now, are more in the 2 to 3 year range, some 5 years. So it creates quite a mismatch, especially when you're trying to get a 15-year financing term. Some projects also need more than 100 permits in certain areas, and some projects get delayed by a year or two, given some permitting issues. Geothermal is also quite cost intensive at the start. There's high upfront development costs and exploration risk. But the good thing is after you've put up the power plant, or after you've put up your geothermal facility, you basically own the fuel now. So no need to buy the fuel, no need to get exposed to volatile commodity prices or FX or Forex fluctuations. And at the same time, with proper resource management, it's been proven to be sustainable now. You have some fields in Italy at Lardarello. It's been around since 1913, so basically more than 100 years in operation. You have the field in New Zealand. It's been in operation since 1958. And within EDC, we also have some wells that have been operating for 35, 40 years already. So the key there is proper resource management, basically. Okay, so, but at the same time now, I mean, harnessing geothermal provides a number of benefits to the country, to the grid, to the host communities, and to the customers now. One is geothermal and other renewables. It helps with energy security and self-sufficiency for the country. So being indigenous, as I mentioned, you reduce reliance on imports now. And it also helps protect against market shocks and price volatilities. If you were to look at this year, for example, coal prices have gone up more than double now compared to last year. In terms of foreign exchange volatility, the peso is down, I think around 9.6% year to date. And even in terms of coal prices, I saw an article where BNF, I mean the Bloomberg New Energy Finance, is saying that even by 2024, 2025, coal price deliveries are still expected to be 2.5 times more than where they were in 2021. At the same time, geothermal helps provide grid stability and reliability. Geothermal can be available 24/7 and can run constantly year-round. It has high capacity factors, 90-95% availability factor. In terms of energy produced, if you compare geothermal, for example, a 100 megawatt geothermal plant can produce the equivalent of a 700 megawatt solar facility, for example, accounting for capacity factors and the availability of the different plants. We also invest a lot in our communities for all of our existing projects and also for our growth projects in terms of education, uplifting the livelihoods, and building capabilities. I mean, we employ a lot of members of our local communities in our different projects. And then in terms of customers, and we've seen this a lot now for the past couple of years, we see a number of customers shifting to renewable energy. And given the market shock and the price volatility, a lot have been clamoring for fixed prices now. So basically, some of them have seen their bills increase significantly or quite fluctuate significantly, given that coal prices have increased. Because it's one thing to have an initial price, but when certain suppliers can pass through the volatility in prices or in the foreign exchange, then your electricity bills can go up significantly, during your contract term. So the good thing with geothermal is, given that we own the fuel and that given a lot of the costs are spent upfront, we're able to offer predictable prices for our customers. And we closed more than 240 supplier deals last year. At the same time, I think now a lot of small businesses can also avail of the Green Energy Option Program of the government, or GEOP. So those with 100 kilowatts of demand can directly buy from renewable energy producers like EDC. Those with electricity bills of around 180,000 pesos per month can actually avail of this option right now. So basically, that's a quick snapshot of geothermal. I mean, we can talk for hours about it, but basically, just to highlight in terms of the potential related to geothermal, even in the Philippines, there's room to expand the capacity of geothermal within the country. You also see it in the region. You saw the benefits, especially related to energy sufficiency and self-sufficiency for the country. And at the same time, in terms of offering predictable, not just offering clean energy, but predictable prices for our customers. So at EDC and within the rest of the Lopez Group, so this is basically our mission, which is to forge collaborative pathways for a decarbonized and regenerative future. We'll continue doing our part to help the country in terms of meeting our carbon emission targets. It was set at a reduction of 75% by 2030. And we'll also do our part now in terms of fostering a net zero future in the country. That's it from our end. Ping.
Wow, thank you so much, Ryan. Very inspiring and informative sharing there. We have a few minutes before we wrap up our lunch and learn session today for your burning questions. I'll dive straight into a question for Steve. Steve, waste to energy plants emit more carbon than coal-fired power stations. How do you justify installing waste to energy plants in countries that are struggling to meet climate targets? Is waste a bigger problem than climate change in developing countries like the Philippines? And attached to that, Steve, how effective are pollutant removal systems in advanced waste to energy plants in the developed world? They don't capture 100% of carcinogenic pollutants such as dioxin, right? So I pre-communicated these questions to you, Steve, and now we're excited to hear your answer.
Thanks, Ping. So diving right into it, comparing waste to energy plants to coal-fired power plants is sort of a bit odd, really, because they use coal. We're not using coal. We're using the waste that's generated from human activity. So this is material that's already been processed. It was probably oil that came out of the ground and was then processed into plastic, ethylene, then into plastics, and then into a whole bunch of things. It was also materials that were pulled out of the earth and grown. So that's a sort of non-question. And I know it gets thrown at us a lot, right? But it's just a nice piece. It's a nice slogan, but it's not really helpful. I wanted to use this slide that I've got up to explain the next two questions. So the Stockholm Resilience Centre has done a lot of work on this, on planetary boundaries, and it's based on quite a lot of the work that was done by Professor Kate Raworth from the UK, looking at 9 planetary boundaries, and they're all related, and I'll explain why. So when we talk about climate change is driven by increased greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and how that impacts the biosphere. But it's not the only problem. Right beside it is novel entities. Now, novel entities are these things like dioxins and furans and all these. There was original 12 called the Dirty Dozen, which was released under the Stockholm Treaty. In fact, one of the negotiators of the Stockholm Treaty is one of my colleagues. So we work on this area as well. So when you look at the amount of material that comes out of a waste to energy plant, the energy from waste plant with advanced gas cleanup, let's look at the numbers. So when you burn the material, you will say have a emission of 100 picograms of material based on a certain amount of waste on a landfill. If you put that through a waste to energy plant, you're probably going to produce about 18, and you'll capture about 99.5, maybe even 98% of that material. So there's still a small amount that will get out. And yes, it is highly carcinogenic, this material. It's actually more than carcinogenic, it's teratogenic. So teratogenic means that it changes your DNA. Now, that's the problem with novel entities, because novel entities get into the environment. Now, they do occur naturally. We do produce these materials are produced in bushfires and wildfires, where chlorine and oxygen and carbon burn together at particular temperatures and pressures to produce this family of chemicals. They're also produced in volcanic eruptions, but there's a stasis in the environment between the amount that's produced and the amount that can be collected. And during the 1950s and 60s and 70s, in areas where there were incineration plants or open burning on landfills, people carried a large amount of this material in their fats. And when they were burnt, the emissions, when people were cremated, they measured these emissions. So when you look at, can we capture all of it? No, we can't. But if you were to smoke a cigarette or a pack of cigarettes a day, you'd be getting much more of that material than you would be living within a 500-meter radius of one of these plants. And that may sound like propaganda, but generally speaking, that's the outcome. Now, do they get into the supply chain? They sure do. But they also get in the supply chain when someone burns wood in a boiler, or they burn plastics in a boiler, which happens in some countries I won't talk about. So there's this material that's in our supply chain, and it goes to the issue of planetary boundaries. So it's not a case of, oh, we have to stop doing this one thing. No, we don't have to stop doing one thing. We have to stop doing a lot of things. We need to get off fossil fuels. We need to stop producing pollutants and novel entities. And we should then be doing as little as possible to clean up our supply chains that produce that material. So obviously burning food waste is not a great idea, because you can turn that into another use, right? There will be more technologies that come online. They're just not all commercial yet. So it's, again, this transition. But I would suggest you look at this particular issue, planetary boundaries, because it gives you an idea of where all of these things fit in. And if you look at the bottom, ocean acidification, they say we haven't breached the planetary boundary, but when we breach that planetary boundary, that will be catastrophic. So I think it's, again, understanding the whole equation and cleaning up where we are at the moment. And we are in a very polluted and chaotic world, and we need to do those things that keep the lights on and keep our civilization going, so we can do things like create COVID vaccines. In 24 months, we vaccinated virtually the whole world. So if we're in an environment where we don't have access to this civilizational capacity, then we're going to not be able to solve the problem. So it's a tightrope between, do we stop everything and not be able to resolve the problem because we're already a long way along, or do we keep trying and we change trajectory? And this is the concept of energy transition and basically a just transition. So thanks, Pink. Thank you for giving me an opportunity, and thank you to the people that asked those questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. Very pragmatic, at the same time holistic point of view there. I have another question. I actually have 3 more questions, given the time left for us in this session today. But before that, could I request all our speakers to please turn on your cameras so that we could be ready to answer these questions. Thank you so much, Ryan, Monica, and Vince. This question is actually for you, Vince. What do you make of Korea's declaration a year ago that it will no longer fund overseas coal projects? How credible is that claim, and what progress is Korea making in this regard? So is Korea still on target to its 2050 pledge to be carbon neutral?
I think you're asking 2 questions. So one on the overseas coal financing, and another one on the country's pledge to reach carbon neutrality, right? So
Yes.
When it comes to the overseas coal financing, yes, I think the country is serious about stopping overseas coal financing, mainly because so far the coal financing was mainly led by the state-owned banks, like Export Credit Agency, development banks. Most of them are state-owned. The government making that kind of statement actually means that they will no longer finance coal project overseas. And we see actually recently, the state-owned electric power company KEPCO also made a similar announcement that they will not make any new investment in overseas coal projects. So that's one thing. And when it comes to the country's carbon neutrality target, I think that's a different issue, because currently there are still coal power projects being constructed. The country will no longer build new ones except for those under construction. So that means that once they are built, they will still operate for 30 years at least. That means over 2050. So the government actually is betting on new technologies such as CCUS for this kind of coal or natural gas power plants, and also some other new actually low carbon fuels such as hydrogen to be blended with coal and gas. So that's where the country is focusing on using clean, actually a green hydrogen or ammonia to be blended in coal and gas power plants, starting from 20% blend until 100% blending. So by the end, by 2050, the target is to make clean up all the coal and gas in these power plants and run based on 100% carbon-free fuels. It's unproven, so it still needs some government support.
Thank you so much, Vince. We still have two more questions. And to all of our participants today, thank you in advance for joining Lunch and Learn. I do hope that you are learning a lot from this session. The next question is for Monica. Monica, of course, you know that Singapore purchased its renewable energy from overseas. Do you suppose that the future of renewable energy in Southeast Asia is to share it? And how does this resolve security and generation cost concerns?
Yeah, thank you, Ping, for the questions. So in regards to the Singapore's plan to import the electricity strictly from the renewable, and how is it in the future? Yes, I mean that's the vision that ASEAN member states have throughout years under the dialogue of the APAC, in particular the ASEAN Power Grid Program area, where the vision is to build the one regional grid, power grid, where the another vision in relation to the energy transition is to share all those the renewable energy resources. Maybe now we already see it in the Mekong area, where they share the electricity from the hydro. But now in the future, the member states are looking to share the electricity from the wind and also solar. So in terms of the cost sharing between member states, that's like the bottom problem of our discussion, because it involves like the immense capital and responsibility. So, but for sure, the discussion is still ongoing in the high level. And that's for sure also the vision is towards there, where the member states can share all the renewable energy sources from wind and solar also under the ASEAN Power Grid. So I hope that answer. Did I miss something on your question?
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Monica. And my last question for today's session is for Ryan. Ryan, how do you see geothermal accelerating its increase in energy share? And is there a possibility for it to really be the answer to ending coal dependence in the Philippines?
Okay, thanks for that thing. So I think in terms of accelerating the development, it's aligned with the challenges that I laid out earlier. So, for example, if certain countries want to foster the development of geothermal, there can be a clearer regulatory framework and support related to tariffs and also to permitting, especially in areas where you need additional permits, especially if you want to develop inside a national park. Uh, in terms of supplanting coal, I think geothermal by itself will not be enough. But given, for example, the present share of coal, I think coal is around 46, 47% of the country's um, uh, stake in the energy mix. But I think the good thing with geothermal is that one is there's more room to grow for that one. Number two, as we've seen for the past few years, even before this Ukraine crisis, geothermal has been competitive in terms of offering prices that are lower compared to coal, for example. And then at the same time, we're offering a cleaner source of power na, for the customers. Yeah, so I think in terms of development is addressing some of the key factors and challenges that were laid out earlier, especially related to regulatory and also in terms of the offering risk mitigation schemes na, for the different projects. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vince. And I do hope that we will get, as a Filipino nation, that kind of regulatory support for a more renewable energy deployment in the country. I'm afraid, dear speakers and participants, that that's all the time we have for this Lunch and Learn session. But I do thank Steve Peters at ADB, Ryan Velasco at EDC, Monica Murdikawati at the Asian Center for Energy, and of course, Vince Yo at S&P Global for joining us today and feeding our brains with this ESG information. We hope to be able to engage with you in future Lunch and Learn sessions. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your Friday. Thank you.